What makes someone welcome a stranger into their home, risking the safety of their loved ones? Is it the belief in the inherent goodness of people, or the hope that our kindness might inspire it? These questions linger ominously in the shadow of Stefanie Rüggeberg's story, a tale of misplaced trust that ended in unimaginable tragedy. In 2002, the quiet German town of Lüdenscheid was home to 15-year-old Stefanie. Known for her lively spirit and strong bond with her older brother, Stefanie lived a seemingly idyllic life under the care of her mother, Sylvia. If you're fascinated by unraveling the darkest mysteries and exploring gripping true crime stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and become part of our investigative community. Let's get started on the case. This tranquility was disrupted when Sylvia, newly divorced and yearning for a fresh start, decided to move her family to Mallorca, Spain. It was a choice meant to bring adventure and healing, but ultimately paved the way for devastation. Initially, she journeyed to the island alone, leaving Stefanie and her brother with their grandparents. She took a part-time job as a manager at a luxury hotel and worked tirelessly to prepare for their arrival. By the start of summer, she had secured a spacious apartment in the sunny El Arenal district. Alongside her children, she brought Peter, a new love interest whose charm masked a sinister past. For Stefanie, the move to Mallorca was exhilarating. The island's vibrant culture and nightlife captivated her, and she quickly immersed herself in its energy. Late nights became the norm, as she frequented bars and clubs with newfound friends. Her rebellious streak, though typical for a teenager, caused friction within the family. Sylvia's patience wore thin, and Peter's frustration simmered as Stefanie's actions disrupted the harmony of their new life. Despite their clashes, she and her mother maintained a fragile understanding, though tensions with Peter continued to grow. His controlling demeanor and insistence on order stood in stark contrast to Stefanie's free-spirited nature. Yet beneath the surface of these domestic struggles lay a big threat, one that no one could foresee. The seeds of tragedy had been planted, concealed by the warmth of the Mediterranean sun. Stefanie's trust and defiance collided with Peter's concealed darkness, setting the stage for a nightmare the family would never escape. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a deceptive calm over the Rüggeberg household. Sylvia, unaware of the brewing storm, thought little of the bags strewn carelessly in the hallway. Stefanie must have returned late, she assumed, perhaps too tired or too defiant to follow through on her promises. But as the minutes ticked by and her room remained conspicuously empty, Sylvia's initial irritation began to morph into unease. Peter, unusually alert that morning, claimed he hadn't seen Stefanie, brushing off her absence as another instance of teenage rebellion. Her older brother, still groggy from sleep, had no answers either. Hours turned into a frantic search, but each call Sylvia made to friends and acquaintances led to the same frustrating response. No one had seen Stefanie. This wasn't the first time she had vanished after a night out. Perhaps she'd stayed with friends, too embarrassed or hesitant to face her family after breaking curfew. The family spent the next week combing through the neighborhoods of El Arenal. Sylvia called every friend of Stefanie's, visiting homes and pleading for information. Even Peter, often dismissive of her daughter's behavior, joined in the efforts, though his demeanor remained oddly detached. Each lead evaporated into thin air. The local bars and nightclubs offered no solace, as waitstaff and security guards, overwhelmed by the constant stream of tourists, struggled to remember specific details from over a week prior. Desperation etched deep lines into Sylvia's face as she walked into the police station. Her voice trembled as she recounted the week's events to the officers. They wasted no time, organizing a series of interviews with anyone who might have crossed paths with Stefanie that night. Flyers bearing her image and a description of her last known outfit were plastered across the city. The investigation gained momentum, but the passage of time had done its damage. Witnesses remembered little more than fleeting impressions. A young girl laughing at the bar, dancing with strangers, slipping into the night. No one could say where she went or who she was with when the lights dimmed. For Sylvia, each passing day without answers felt like a lifetime. She clung to hope, refusing to believe the worst, even as the once bustling streets of Mallorca began to take on an eerie emptiness. She sat quietly in the corner of the police station, clutching Stefanie's photographs in her hands, her face a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The picture of her daughter with Marcus became the centerpiece of the investigation. Detectives wasted no time in pursuing the lead, driving to the modest apartment where he lived. When the door creaked open, the 19-year-old DJ stood before them, visibly shaken. His hands trembled as he gripped the frame of the door, and his voice wavered as he acknowledged that he had seen Stefanie on the night she vanished. His initial cooperation seemed genuine, but his demeanor was erratic. The detectives took note of the unease radiating from him. The small apartment felt suffocatingly dark, despite the midday sun streaming through the windows. The investigators began their search, combing through every corner for clues. In the bedroom, they found a jacket draped over a chair, its pocket holding a single gold earring. Sylvia's heart sank when she identified it as Stefanie's, confirming that her daughter had been there. Pressed for answers, his nervousness escalated into stammering explanations. He admitted to leaving the club with Stefanie, but insisted that they had parted ways shortly afterward. His story, however, conflicted with the accounts of the sisters, who had last seen Stefanie alive. The timeline didn't add up, and the detectives grew increasingly suspicious. When they found faint stains on the living room carpet, the search in the flat got scary. Experts in forensics were called right away and took samples to analyze. The atmosphere grew tense as the evidence hinted at a violent encounter. Marcus, now visibly distressed, refused to answer further questions and demanded legal representation. Witnesses from the nightclub recalled seeing the young couple leave together, their interactions playful but growing more intense as the night progressed. Some remembered the DJ's frustration when Stefanie returned to the club later, brushing off his attempts to speak with her. The evidence collected painted a grim picture, but there was still no trace of Stefanie. The forensic results would take time, and the investigators knew that time was not on their side. The investigation seemed to be running in circles until an unexpected lead emerged. On September 20th, 2002, a man arrived at the police station in El Arenal, claiming to have seen something unusual weeks earlier. The witness, a local farmer, described an abandoned property on the outskirts of town that had recently shown signs of suspicious activity. His description mentioned a foul smell that had begun emanating from the old farmhouse, drawing his concern. Detectives, desperate for any progress, immediately followed up on the lead. The farmhouse sat hidden behind overgrown vegetation, its crumbling walls and broken windows bearing the scars of years of neglect. As they entered the premises, the smell intensified, guiding them to the source. In the corner of a dust-covered room lay the decomposed remains of a female body. The corpse was clothed in pajamas, with socks and underwear still intact. The scene was grim, and the advanced state of decomposition rendered immediate identification impossible. However, given the timing and the location, investigators suspected the remains belonged to Stefanie. DNA samples were collected and compared with Sylvia's genetic material, and the devastating confirmation soon arrived. The body was indeed that of the missing 15-year-old girl. The discovery intensified the urgency of the case. Investigators meticulously examined the scene, hoping to uncover any clues about the perpetrator. They found no obvious weapon or signs of a struggle, but the location itself offered terrifying implications. The abandoned farmhouse, isolated from the bustling nightlife of Mallorca, hinted at a calculated decision by the killer to conceal their crime far from prying eyes. With the body identified, suspicion turned once again to DJ Marcus. He still had a good alibi, though, and there was no physical proof that he had anything to do with the murder. Despite Stefanie's belongings being found in his apartment, the autopsy results confirmed that her death had occurred elsewhere. Her camera found in her room became a focal point. It suggested that she might have returned home at some point before her disappearance. Detectives revisited her immediate circle, focusing on anyone who had access to the apartment. This line of inquiry led them back to Peter, Sylvia's live-in boyfriend. Known for his strained relationship with Stefanie, he reluctantly revealed a previously unmentioned detail. During their stay in Majorca, Sylvia had allowed a German tenant named Torsten to occupy part of their apartment illegally. This revelation raised new questions about the mysterious tenant and his potential involvement in the tragedy. Torsten's criminal history cast a sinister shadow over the investigation. His escape from a German prison, where he had been serving time for robbery and sexual assault, painted him as a calculated and dangerous individual. His sudden appearance in Mallorca, before Stefanie's disappearance, now seemed far from coincidental. As Spanish and German authorities collaborated to track him, they uncovered unsettling details. He had vanished from his residence in Wuppertal, leaving few traces behind. Investigators turned to his neighbors and acquaintances for leads, eventually encountering a 50-year-old mechanic who provided a chilling account. In February 2003, Torsten had arrived at the mechanic's garage in a white Volkswagen minibus. He requested modifications that raised immediate suspicion in hindsight: tinted windows, emergency light installations, and the removal of interior seating to create a large bed-like space. The mechanic also found a bag inside the vehicle containing peculiar items, including cable ties, small spherical objects, sleeping pills, and explicit magazines. At the time, the mechanic thought little of it and completed the work. Detectives tracked down the minibus in a nearby city, now abandoned but still holding crucial evidence. Inside, they discovered what investigators would later label as a rapist's kit: chloroform bottles, restraints, women's clothing, intimate photographs, and a gun dummy. The unsettling collection suggested meticulous planning and the intent to intimidate or overpower potential victims. Forensics on the vehicle revealed a connection to Stefanie's case. The toxicological analysis of her body had already confirmed chloroform in her system, and one of the bottles found in the van bore a label from a local pharmacy. A pharmacist later identified Torsten as the man who had purchased the substance. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Torsten had likely lured Stefanie into the van using the dummy gun and then incapacitated her with chloroform. Investigators believe she was rendered unconscious before being transported to the abandoned farmhouse, where her body was ultimately found. Despite the mounting evidence, there were still gaps in the timeline. Detectives were determined to uncover how Torsten had gained access to Stefanie that night, and whether anyone else might have been involved. As investigators found new evidences from the minibus, a new lead emerged. Among the personal belongings discovered in the van was a handbag belonging to an 18-year-old woman who survived through a horrifying meeting with Torsten. She, wishing to remain anonymous, recounted her experience with Torsten, explaining that he had approached her in a parking lot while she was returning to her car. At first, he seemed polite, asking for directions and making casual conversation. Moments later, she lost consciousness, waking up disoriented in the back of a van. The acrid smell of chemicals lingered in the air, and the confined space confirmed she had been drugged. She recalled that the rear doors of the vehicle were unlocked, allowing her to escape when Torsten left her alone. Though shaken, she managed to run to safety without sustaining physical injuries. When shown a photograph of Torsten, she immediately identified him as her attacker. Her testimony added weight to the theory that he had used chloroform in a calculated effort to subdue his victims. Meanwhile, forensic investigators focused on the farmhouse where Stefanie's body had been found. They uncovered evidence suggesting Torsten had stayed on the property for weeks following the murder, including bedding and discarded items bearing his scent. All the evidences painted a clearer picture of his predatory methods. Undercover investigators worked tirelessly to gain more information. One officer, placed in Torsten's prison cell, befriended him and recorded a partial confession. In the recording, Torsten admitted to having killed Stefanie but claimed it was accidental. He described waiting for her return from a party and confronting her in the apartment. According to his account, an argument ensued, and he claimed she had attacked him first. He insisted that her death resulted from an accidental fall, though this conflicted with forensic findings. Experts determined that her death was caused by an excessive dose of chloroform, dispelling Torsten's claims of an accidental struggle. The prosecutor's office began building a case for deliberate homicide. Torsten's background became a key part of the investigation. Diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic traits, his troubled childhood, marked by neglect, abuse, and a series of foster homes, offered some context but no justification for his crimes. Prosecutors sought the harshest sentence possible, determined to bring justice for Stefanie and protect others from Torsten's dangerous behavior. His ability to manipulate those around him became a disturbing focal point in the investigation. For over a month, he had seamlessly blended into the search efforts, accompanying Stefanie's family and participating in public raids. He offered false reassurances, helping distribute flyers and suggesting potential locations for her whereabouts, all while knowing precisely where her body lay. As more details emerged, the calculated cruelty of Torsten's actions shocked even seasoned investigators. He had preyed on the kindness of Sylvia and her family, using their hospitality to his advantage. His decision to move Stefanie's body to the abandoned farm was deliberate, allowing him to maintain the appearance of innocence while concealing his crime. During the trial, the court relied heavily on forensic evidence to reconstruct Stefanie's final moments. The toxicology reports and the forensic examination of her body showed no doubt. Chloroform had been deliberately used to incapacitate her. Evidence from the farmhouse and Torsten's involvement in earlier assaults strengthened the prosecution's case. The revelations about his background deepened the tragedy. Torsten's past, filled with neglect and abuse, had shaped him into a man without empathy or moral boundaries. His history of offenses, including sexual assaults using chloroform, suggested a predator who planned his crimes meticulously. Despite this, the court's final decision left many feeling justice had fallen short. Sentenced to 11 years, his punishment was met with outrage. Stefanie's family, devastated by the verdict, voiced their disappointment publicly. They believed the evidence painted a far darker picture of a man who posed an ongoing threat to society. Police from both Spain and Germany supported their calls for harsher penalties, warning that Torsten was a ticking time bomb. Upon his release, Torsten disappeared from public view. Authorities, under strict privacy laws, concealed his new identity and location. No new criminal charges have surfaced against him, though investigators remain cautious. To Sylvia and her family, the knowledge that Stefanie's murderer could still walk freely weighed heavily, a constant reminder of the fragility of justice. The tragedy served as a haunting lesson in trust and caution. For those who knew Stefanie, her story became a painful warning of how a single decision to allow a stranger into their lives could lead to unthinkable consequences.